Chair recognizes the Honourable, the member for Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's nice to be back in the House after an absence. It only doesn't seem like 5 months ago, just the same, since we walked out after that 4-day filibuster, and here we are. My grandmother had an expression, she had many expressions actually, and she influenced my life greatly, but she used to say, time and tide waits for no man. And I thought about that last night as I thought about, seems like yesterday, I ran in a by-election in 2013 and joined a small caucus of 5. And I am now starting my 7th setting, Mr. Speaker. So, and the only thing constant, as my colleagues have heard me say many times since then, has been change with the 7 by-elections and the great results of the general election. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't say a bit of a rough spring, but I think the tide is turning. So I want to say welcome back to everybody, welcome back to my team, and welcome back to the members across the way. The member for Cape St. Francis, I always enjoy listening to him. He talked about the fishery, which is near and dear to my heart, because the fishery plays a very, very vital, crucial role in my district, the beautiful district of Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair. L'Anse, Clair starts at the Quebec border, and my district goes north as far as Cartwright, and then I have the 3 unconnected communities of Norman Bay, Williams Harbour, and Black Tickle. So as I was listening to him mention the fishery, I wanted to say that myself and the Minister of Fisheries will be making our way on Wednesday morning, if all goes well, up to my district to attend the Shrimp Company's biennial. A huge event. They're a very key player in my district, and it's companies like the Labrador Fishermen's Union Shrimp Company that are driving the success of the fishery in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm very proud, Mr. Speaker, that they are from my district. 35 years now, revenues of well over $80 million annually, definitely one of our success stories. And I think that the Shrimp Company is a shining example of Labrador's potential and how the values of community, partnership, cooperation, and passion can allow a region to be the best that it can be economically and socially, Mr. Speaker. What I'm really happy to talk about over the minutes that I have left, Mr. Speaker, is I was, you know, we took the reins of government at probably the most difficult time in the history of Newfoundland and Labrador. Some of us more than others have had a very difficult time dealing with that, you know, managing the people's expectations. And I think that my team have done a very, very good job thus far. And I want to talk about Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair and some of the funding that have come into that district. And as I look down through the list, I thought about Minister Foote when she was speaking in Gander last weekend, and she said, you know, somebody said, oh, there's a lot of money coming to Newfoundland and Labrador, good for you, you're dragging it in. And she said, why shouldn't I drag it into Newfoundland and Labrador? Why shouldn't it come to our province? We've been in the wilderness for 10 years. And I thought about that when I was gathering some notes for myself to get up. Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair has been in the wilderness for a long time, Mr. Speaker. We have a long way to go. We have our challenges. I know that there are services that we have in urban areas that we will never have in Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair. But I can tell you over the last 3.5 years, especially when the House is sitting, and when I leave here on a Friday morning and I fly back into my district, I am just in another world. We have a long way to go. So we started in June with an announcement in Mary's Harbour, $63 million, and that was cost shared by the feds, Mr. Speaker. That's going to see 2 80-kilometre paving tenders in my district, hopefully by the end of the next calendar year. And that is not just going to benefit Cartwright-L'Anse, Clair, Mr. Speaker. That is going to benefit the entire province. And I'm going to talk in a couple of minutes about the tourism numbers that are up in the district. So people now, Mr. Speaker, now that we have the road is connected on through to Goose Bay and Labrador City, the numbers are growing exponentially of tourists that's coming in maybe across the Strait of Belle Isle on the Apollo and heading on north and going out through down Lab West where the district that my colleague represents. So that $63 million, Mr. Speaker, is certainly an investment into the entire province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm always amazed with the number of emails that I get from people that live outside of Labrador that comment on the road, or, you know, when is your road being finished. So I think we're on track for 2019, 2020, Mr. Speaker, to have that done, and I certainly look forward to the day. So right now we're going to be doing 80 kilometres of paving north of Red Bay, and Charlottetown branch south we're doing 80 more. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I've been working closely with my colleague, the Minister for Municipal and Intergovernmental Affairs. And I am more than delighted, Mr. Speaker. I think it's 10 projects that's happening in my district, Mr. Speaker. 10 projects where we have had a significant, maybe around $4 million has been the provincial contribution, Mr. Speaker. And I'm just going to run through some of them for the benefit of the people that might be watching. We have Red Bay, Mr. Speaker, a World Heritage UNESCO site that I want to say is up 26% this summer in the number of visitors. The highest it's been in the last, the highest it's been to date, Mr. Speaker. They saw 11,000 visitors, which was an increase of 26% over 2015. Red Bay receiving for the paving of roads in that community, a provincial contribution of over $400,000, Mr. Speaker. L'Anse receiving a contribution of over $200,000 for sewer upgrades, essential basic work, Mr. Speaker, in that area. And on down to Mary's Harbour, Mr. Speaker, we see under Clean Water and Wastewater Fund, again, a federal provincial cost shared $680,000 in pump house repairs and over $200,000 in lift station repairs. And Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that we have a minister that recognizes that in 2016 there are seniors that still do not have running water. Communities that, we talk about communities and the life of communities and the future and the sustainability, and you have to consider all that, Mr. Speaker, before you make an investment. I understand that, but these are communities that are connected by road, communities that will be around for a long time, and yet those communities did not have water, did not have sewer, could not turn on a tap, things, Mr. Speaker, that we take for granted every single day. Mr. Speaker, Lodge Bay, I just mentioned, where I attended the remembrance ceremony. $123,000 into Lodge Bay with a provincial contribution of $49,000. A new water and wastewater system, Mr. Speaker, for Port Hope Simpson. A $348,000, Mr. Speaker, provincial contribution. Here we have a situation, Mr. Speaker, where we had sewer that's been running out over the road for the last number of years. A health hazard, deplorable, children that live in that area. And I'm so pleased again that the minister took that project and sent it up and got funds matched, and the community is very excited to see this project finally funded, Mr. Speaker. Sanitary sewer lift station in St. Louis, a provincial contribution of $74,000. Charlottetown, my home community, Mr. Speaker, we have a well drilling project and a phase of water and sewer happening in that community with a provincial contribution of $268,000 and $143,000. So, Mr. Speaker, significant investment into communities in the most basic of infrastructure when we're talking artesian wells, which, by the way, you know, Mr. Speaker, we're learning that not everything has to be a phase of water and sewer, which is the most expensive way to go in these communities. We can have well and septic, and we can do some drilling of wells, and it's a more cost-efficient way of giving Aunt Nellie or Uncle George water that's running from their tap, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we had a number of other wonderful things. We've got some extra, my colleague, the Minister of Transportation and Works, who's very familiar with seeing my face. We had a number of extra crossings put on, Mr. Speaker, just because the traffic is up, and we needed those extra crossings, and I was pleased to see him do that. Just from May to October, we have had more than 75,000 people in that short window this summer, more than 75,000 people that took that went across the Strait of Belle Isle on the Apollo, Mr. Speaker. Not just tourism, we have some big mega projects happening in Labrador as well. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, a number of my other communities have benefited financially over the last few months. Penson's Arm, another little town where the kids get on a school bus and they drive 29 kilometres into Charlottetown to go to school. And I throw a bouquet to the Minister of Transportation and Works for recognising that the road was a hazard. It was almost grown over. It was like driving through a tunnel with brush. And he approved $182,000, Mr. Speaker, for those kids to be able to get on a bus and drive twice a day on that road safely back and forth to school. I had a number of communities that received fire equipment. Very essential, Mr. Speaker. My own community, when I look at what they have done, I mean, these are little fire brigades that are doing everything they can to try and help themselves. They're having their coal plate sales and their hot turkey suppers, but sometimes they need that little bit of extra help. You know, I represent, in my community of Charlottetown, we have the only shrimp processing facility in Labrador, so we have all these boats that are tied to the dock. We have the shrimp plant, we have the neighbouring community of Penson's Arm that depends on them. So vital that we help them get some of the resources that they need in the event something like a fire should happen. And speaking of fires happening, the southern part of my district, L'Anse, Clair, they lost a community centre which was a focal point in their community, and we have been able to help them do some design work with the engineering piece, and they are well underway to putting a new building back into that community, Mr. Speaker. Black Tickle, Mr. Speaker, which was covered a lot of miles in the media. We thought initially that Black Tickle would be losing their nurse. I'm very pleased that I was able to work with my colleague, the Minister of Health and Community Service, and Mr. Speaker, we were able to maintain medical services in that community in a more efficient, fiscally prudent manner than was happening before, Mr. Speaker. Everything it seemed with the prior administration, money was easy come, easy go, and nobody really had handles on anything, you know, how much money was going out the door. And it looked like for that community to have a nurse, it was going to cost us quite a bit more than we could afford, but we worked through a number of things, and I'm very pleased to say that I talked to the local service district a couple of days ago, and things are working really well with the new model of health care in the community of Black Tickle, and they're quite happy to have the nurse there, Mr. Speaker, in that community. I see that my time is running out, Mr. Speaker, and I had a whole lot more I want to say, but I'm just going to skip over, and I have to make a comment on a question that came in question period that said, where the Leader of the Opposition asked the Premier, what was the cost of shutting down the Muskrat Falls project for those few days? And Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, as someone who was in the middle of that upheaval, I'm going to tell you, whatever it cost to shut it down was far less than the cost of keeping it going the way it was, Mr. Speaker. Here we were just hours and days before impoundment, and there was so many unresolved issues because the proper work was not done up front. And Mr. Speaker, I couldn't be more proud of the team that I work with, and led by the Premier, that 12-hour meeting with the Aboriginal groups where we definitely broke new ground, Mr. Speaker, because we recognized that the fact that this project had ballooned $5 billion more than what they had initially said it was, that the health of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador trumps everything, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we broke new ground and made sure that proper measures were in place so that the health of the people would not be compromised. Thank you.
Good job.